Again, thank you all for coming out today. One of the things when we think about cybersecurity, even at Warwick, that landscape is changing all the time. I'm sure you guys are aware of it. We're aware of it as well, and so we've had to adjust, much like the industry has and everyone involved in it. So over the last year, we've looked at our offering and how do we support our customers or our clients in this capacity. Because as an MSP, just the general idea or onus of the network falls on us, whether it's right or wrong, or it's contracted or non-contracted. If we're providing IT support for you, you rely on us for security. It's just the way it goes. So we've had to adjust as well. How many of you have had a security event or incident over the last year that you're aware of? Anyone? What kind of event was it?
We got breached at all of our locations by our technical support company. Actually got breached, but we were forward-facing to the consumer, so it was on us.
Good. And how long did it take you to discover that?
It was brought to my attention about a week or so after. It got loaded on about 2 months before I was aware of it, that there potentially was a breach. Then it was another month before it was confirmed that there was a breach.
See, so it's to Joe's point, they can be hanging out, and they'll do that. They'll do some recon, and then they'll figure out how to do the exploit, and then they'll take action on that. We see a lot of that in various levels, whether it's ransomware, whether it's a rogue user, potentially, all flavors. And so we've had to adjust our offering. And our offering, we have 3 offerings. There's a pamphlet in the back if you're interested in them, but they all start with a layer of security. So what we do on all of our engagements and then ongoing is we assess the network. And we don't just throw in an agent and just say, all right, here, you can call us for support. We inventory your network and look at your assets, because there's probably a lot more assets on your network than anyone is aware of, or management might be aware of, that are potential access points for threats or vulnerabilities. So after we inventory your network and we look at those assets, we sit down with you and say, all right, let's classify these assets. Are these high value, middle value, low value? And then we look at the vulnerabilities against those assets. And then we create a plan, typically a layered approach. It could be, as minimal as like a 3-layer, up to a 7-layer approach, depending on what works for you and your business and your users. Because anytime you work with security, you have to work with usability versus protection, right? Risk management. You can have a really locked down environment, right? But no one can use it. Or you can have a really flexible one where everyone's an administrator of their own machine, and then it's really usable, but it's really usable for everyone, including hackers. So we not only have revamped our product offering, but one of my jobs is to look at what are the market leading technologies and who are those people that provide those. And then we build our service offering around those. We have some of those partners here today. Ryan is a security consulting expert. We partner with him to provide a certain part of our overall feature set or security set, and he will go through some doomsday stuff for you.
Doomsday.
Right?
I appreciate it, Mike. So again, thank you for coming out today. I have about 35 minutes, and in that time, unfortunately, I can't cure all of your cybersecurity woes. We are going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are out there, maybe taking a different look at cybersecurity and what you're doing today, and also a few tidbits on how you can better protect yourself right out of the gate. So I don't know if anyone in this room has come to a presentation like this. Maybe they've gone on a webinar, been on the internet, and things start off with something like this, right? Cyber attacks, the headlines, Target, Equifax, Sony, and they hit you with all these doomsday events. Perhaps they put up a great infographic, and you can see that 50% of incidents come from employees clicking on something they shouldn't have. 93% of phishing emails are pushing ransomware. So it's pretty graphic that has a ton of data. Very good data. It's actionable data. The problem is it creates a bit of numbness, right? We get bombarded by it all the time. And what I want to make sure that we're doing today is not confusing that numbness with really your threshold for risk. So let's take a step back and let's look at how all of those events, how those numbers really apply to your business. So you can see this is kind of funny, but when we're talking about risk in a business sense, right, there's going to be some sort of financial impact. If we're talking about risk in life, there's going to be some sort of impact to your life. And we know that everyone falls somewhere on this threshold or this gamut of risk. Some people are willing to leave their keys in their car and leave it unlocked at an airport, right? Some are going to wear life jackets on a boat, and some are even going to seek out the 4 places that you can pay to swim with great white sharks, right? They're all varying levels of risk, and this really applies to your business as well, right? What do you want to be protected against? How far do you want to go? So when we touch on how data breaches occur, it's a little bit complex, but if we break down just a few steps, and Mike had touched on them, we see that the bad guys want to gain access to your system, right? And they do it various types of ways, through exploits, phishing, right? They're deploying software that allows them to have remote access, right? And then once they're established, they want to sit in your environment. The average dwell time that a bad guy, once they're in your environment, is actually 284 days. The numbers will vary a bit, but that's a pretty average number. So a dwell time, like Joe had mentioned, is when someone is in your house, so to speak, and you don't even know it. So think about that, right? Someone is in your network. They have access to your data, your logins, perhaps your client information. So it's a very scary concept. And what they're doing while they're in there is they're looking to see what's going on. Right? What transactions are going on? They're going to deploy other software so that if you detect how they got in and you close down that gap, they're going to have a backup plan, right? So they're doing a lot of damage in that time, but they're really, for the most part, trying to stay undetected, right? Because the more they can learn, the bigger the payout's going to be when we get down to this last piece, when they do harm, right? And that could be where they ransom your data. We've all heard about ransomware. Your system gets locked down. You can't access any of your files. That's a kind of a smash and grab approach, but very effective. They may want to leverage your resources. They may want to use your computers to do their own transactions. Maybe they want to steal data. Maybe it's valuable to them, or it can be resold in the black market. So let's take a look at 2 examples that have been in the news. Give you an opportunity. Has there been anything in the news lately as far as the enterprise or big companies that you've seen related to cybersecurity? One of them very large, probably affected just about everyone in this room. You can yell it out. Equifax, yeah, that's a very good one. So I want to talk about Equifax and Target real quick, and I want to tie it back to the last slide, how breaches occur. I don't want to be the doomsday slide that I showed in the beginning and kind of made light of. What we want to do is understand that everyone is at risk, and the way the Enterprise and Target were breached was really pretty simple. In the case of Equifax, and you'll probably become even more angry if you didn't realize this, they were exploited because they didn't apply a patch to their web application server. They knew about this patch for about 2 months, and all they had to do was update. But that created a vulnerability, an exploitable path for the bad guys to gain access to the system. So while that was at the enterprise level, you can think about how this applies to your desktops, to your phones, to your servers, right? It's not a movie scene. It's not someone going to town. It's an identifiable, exploitable path. In the case of Target, many of you may have systems that you're connected to or that others are connected to you in the opposite order. So for Target, they were hacked not necessarily by a targeted attack, but their HVAC vendor had access to their network so that they could service their HVAC, right, which was on the network. Target wasn't necessarily hacked. The HVAC company was hacked. They were targeted, right? And then they were able to gain access to Target while they waited in that dwell time, and they collected information. Right? So it's very real, and you can apply that from the enterprise all the way down to your personal life. Those same sort of exploits apply to your computer at home as well. So we hear oftentimes that SMBs, right? We have nothing worth taking. However, we know that that's not the reality. The information that you have is valuable to cyber criminals. They're going to be looking at, right, a theft of funds, ransoming your data, or stealing sensitive information. They can use that for gain, right? So you are a target. We hear that attacker groups won't waste their time on SMB targets specifically. Again, in reality, most attacks aren't targeted. If any of you have ever done sales, right, you look at a funnel. The bigger the funnel is at the top and feeds down, the likelihood your close rate's going to increase. Well, it's the same idea here. Phishing, emails, you can send out millions of emails. Let's cast a wide net. Let's see what happens. Let's see what comes back in, right? And a phishing email that gets hit might be someone at your company, or it could be someone at another company. They're going to exploit vulnerabilities. So we talked about patches as a very simple example. A lot of you may have systems that are no longer supported, and you have to run legacy operating systems, or that software is no longer being updated, right? Those are vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So you want to think about, work with a managed service provider to at very least isolate those sort of systems if they don't have to be online. And we know that there are compromising accounts through stolen credentials, and that happens in various ways. We'll touch on a few of those a little bit later in the presentation. So what I want to do is have a kind of a fun little video. Has anyone ever seen ransomware being deployed by chance, or has anyone ever gotten a phishing email that they know of? We got a couple of hands. So I'm going to run through this video. Unfortunately, my back will be turned to you, but I want to narrate as we go along. Oh, there we go. So what we can see here is that an email came in from the United States Postal Service saying you had a package, delivery had failed because you weren't home, but we've been kind enough to attach this file that has all the information that you need to track down your package. So great, I don't want to lose my Amazon package, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this attachment. Seems legitimate, everything looks good. Now, how many of you have opened up Word or Excel and you've seen this enable content at the top, right? So everyone that has it should be saying yes, because it is a standard now. Do you know what that's doing by chance? Or is it just a nuisance? It's a nuisance. So it's a protection step that Microsoft put in place to help reduce the risk of this type of attack. Because ultimately, when we click on enable content, which we know we have to do to edit this document, right, or to access the document, it's going to deploy a script. And that script acts very swiftly. So as soon as we enable content, at that point, we've already been hit by ransomware. Your files are going to be encrypted from that point moving forward, right? It's very simple and happens quite often. So the bad guys are nice enough to go as far as to say, hey, here's what happened. Here's where you go to download the browsers. Oh, you don't know what Bitcoin are? We'll show you how to buy it, and we'll show you how to give it to us. And once you do, we'll go ahead and unlock your files. If that's not customer service, I'm not really sure what is, right? So this was to, again, just to highlight how simple it is to be attacked by a phishing attempt. And in years past, right, we kind of make fun of the Nigerian prince who's stuck and needs money. That's not the case anymore for phishing. I've gotten emails from my own IT staff saying that looked like phishing attempts or that were phishing attempts. It came from the right domain. It looked like someone that I trusted because perhaps another account was breached or someone was simulating that path, right? So it looks like something trustworthy. The email said, hey, Ryan, could you enter in your credentials? We have a new great way so that you can reset your system admin logins in case you forget it. I'm like, whoa, so you're going to ask me to enter my credentials so that IT can give me the rights to reset my credentials, right? Something fishy is going on there. And if we were to go back in this email example, you'll see that it was not personalized. It said, dear customer, right? It didn't say dear John. It didn't say dear Ryan. There were typos. The domain that it came from didn't say at USPS. It had some random words. So there's some key indicators that you want to be on the lookout for. That's a very important piece in educating your staff to identify these. So the other thing that we hear oftentimes is the tools that we have in place will protect me. And in part, absolutely, that is true. There's always a foundation, right? You kind of have the basics, if you will. Unfortunately, the nature of war is constant change. Things have evolved, right? 3 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, were you seeing the headlines that you're seeing today? Right? The criminals are becoming much more intelligent, much more savvy in the way that they're going about these attacks. So because the nature of war is constant change, we need to change as well. And that's what Mike had alluded to. What we were doing a few years ago isn't going to cut it today, right? What got us here isn't going to get us there. So we see that the reality is that most attacks bypass basic security. Firewalls, 95% of ransomware get past firewalls. 66% of malware get past antivirus. And 1 in 3 phishing emails gets opened. Right, so think about that. It doesn't mean that firewalls are ineffective or you shouldn't have one or antivirus is worthless. It's a matter of things have changed, the attack vectors have changed, and how we have to line up our defense in depth has changed as well, right? The more that we can layer, the less that's going to fall through the gaps. So when you look at sort of what is standard today under current services, right? Managed IT, you're going to provide the help desk services. You're going to look at patching. You're going to do the basic IT fundamentals. Backup and recovery. I would remove backup and recovery from maybe a security offering per se, because for me, security is more preventative, but backup and disaster recovery is still paramount nonetheless, because when something does happen, right, you want to get back to an operational state. And not only do you want to back up your data, you want to have it in multiple locations. You want to be able to virtualize. You want to reduce the amount of time that you're down, right? So that's a key component of backup and recovery and business continuity overall. And then some of these foundational security services we talked about, AV, firewalls, DNS filtering. So these are all kind of that, you got your front door locked, as Joe said, but we need to expand what we're doing in our mindset. So as we move up this strategy, we want to look at threat vector protection, not just individual attacks that we want to protect ourselves against, but what's the avenue, right? Is it through the network? Is it through email? Is it through rogue Wi-Fi access points? Is it the mobile devices? Let's look at locking down the ways that the criminals get in, right? Let's start there. Let's identify where you want to protect yourself. Active risk monitoring. So part of this is really for us about looking at hardening your environment naturally. There's a lot of configuration changes that are inherent to a Windows environment, for instance. They're going to help safeguard you from attacks. Some of you may have heard of like RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, right? That's something that's very bad to have enabled out in the wild because attackers know how to gain access to that very quickly. And once they do that, they have access to your network as well. So we want to take a look at kind of hardening naturally and then the tools that are feeding into the system to identify gaps. So, if your AV isn't running, but your patches are up to date, if you recall WannaCry when that happened, you were going to be safe. But if patches weren't applied, your AV wasn't running or wasn't up to date, that system was more at risk. So part of what Warwick's able to do is correlate data from a lot of different sources and identify these gaps in your coverage and assess how big those gaps are so that they know where to take action to get them to an acceptable threshold of risk. And then lastly, looking at attack monitoring and response, this is really in large part, a human component. So we're looking at key indicators of risk. So I didn't catch your name in the red shirt. You had a breach, right? So more than likely, there were indicators of risk somewhere along the line, right, that may or may not have been able to be identified. So if someone were trying to gain access to your environment, let's say under a brute force attack, That's a very straightforward approach. They're going to be trying to log into your system over and over and over. Probably not an individual, someone using a script or some other software, but an indicator of risk is, hey, someone tried to gain access to a machine 25 times and failed. I mean, that's more than a hangover morning, right? That's a really bad day. So that's a key indicator of risk. So we want to take a look at those things actively and mitigate it and say, no, this is probably harmful behavior, right? We want to isolate that machine. We want to recommend password changes. We want to take a look at why that system was accessible and get you back to a proper operational state where your overall risk has been reduced, right? So we look at a lot of different things like elevated privileges, logging in from IP addresses that are out of the country, logging in after hours. So if your employees typically end their day at 5 and you know they don't log in, someone logging in at 8, 9 o'clock at night might be an indicator of risk. We want to look at those behavioral patterns and identify where action should be taken to help mitigate further spread of harm, right? So Warwick, and Mike alluded to this in the opening, we want to help educate, our current clients. We want to help educate everyone because it's a team game, cybersecurity. So what are the objectives and impacts of cybersecurity to your business? We want to have a real discussion about where you stand today. So on that chart a few slides ago, right? Are you at the current service level? Are you looking at maybe elevating what your security posture is? So where are you today? Let's be honest about that. And we want to understand what acceptable risks are. Not everyone in this room is going to be at the same threshold of risk. Some people are going to be more willing to download bootleg versions of Word, of Photoshop, right, and install those. You're the folks that are willing to also swim with sharks, right? Actually, I would like to swim with sharks. That'd be really cool. But, right, so there's going to be all along the gamut. So what we want to do is help consult with you and say, okay, what have you seen? Who has access to your data? Let's look at the supply chain. Who's coming in? Who's going out? And let's identify what the acceptable risks are. And then let's get you from a current state and then map what that plan looks like to get you to a desired state. Maybe we get you to that desired state in a year. Maybe it's a month, 2 months, right? We want to work on that plan together because there may be several iterations of how we ultimately get there. So there, to my knowledge, have always been 3 pillars of cybersecurity. You have process, people, and technology. Up until recently, people haven't been invested in, right? The folks who are using the machines for work on a daily basis have really been a resource that I think have been neglected. I had a chance to speak with the Chief Information Security Officer of Alcoa, Pittsburgh company, and several years ago they had a huge breach. And he said, Ryan, I had a budget that would blow your mind, right? We're a multi-billion-dollar company. I had the best of the best, and I had 2 and 3 times of the best, right? All layered up. He goes, wouldn't you know that it was an individual who clicked on a phishing email that got through all of my technology? He goes, so I started to invest in people, right? So there's a reason that people are on here as one of the pillars of cybersecurity. You have to have technology. You have to have layers to start to block those risks at the network level, at the computer level. Process is paramount in knowing what has happened, how are we going to keep you in the state that you're at. If that should change, how do we get you back there? And again, training the people that you have as a layer of your security posture. Now what Warwick is able to do, and this is just a graphical representation of what I explained a few minutes ago, but we're taking these sort of things like your patches, which are a security concern, right? We want to make sure those are up to date all the time. The configurations around the users and the system, but we're also going to look at your endpoint protection, your DNS filtering. We're going to look at awareness training. So we can put you through modules. We can do simulated phishing attempts. We can see which employees clicked on those phishing emails. Give them targeted education to say, hey, you fell for this trick. Let's make sure you stay on the lookout for it next time. We can also do training around PCI and compliance. But what we're doing is we're taking all of that data and we're equating it to a risk score based on those threat vectors that you want to protect against and what your level of risk that we established is at. So we know that there are certain categories at risk, some that aren't at risk, but where do we need to take action? So at a glance, we know where you should be and where you need to go, right? So let's get you back to that good state as quickly as possible. And at the end of the day, right, when you're talking about cybersecurity, we want to first prevent. I mentioned data backup, which is very important, but ransomware, for instance, right, you can restore back to a good operational state with a backup. But what happens if the attack really was more, to pull your data out of your system? You can back up to a state where maybe the bad guys didn't have access to your system, but your data's still gone. It's still in the dark web. It's still being auctioned off. Damage has already been done. So yes, data backup is very, very critical, but we want to really focus on prevention as well. So let's stop the malware from being executed. Let's educate the users so they don't click on those phishing emails, right? They don't go to the bad sites. We talk about phishing, that's through email. You can even get texts. I got a text the other day that said, hey, check out this picture you were tagged in on Facebook. Right? That's intriguing. Oh, I wonder, why did I get a text about that? Maybe it's a buddy. You click on that, it goes to a site that looks like Facebook, just like Facebook. And it says, hey, can you log in? Sure, I'll log in. Here's my password. And then nothing happens. Like, oh, maybe it didn't take, let me log in again. That's just someone farming your information, right? Now they got you. And I would guess that most of you probably have the same password for your Gmail, your Facebook, maybe your work logins, banking, right? So now if they have one email, they have one password, they're going to try to log into all kind of places and do a lot more harm than, uploading some crazy selfies onto your Facebook page, right? So we want to detect what is happening in the environment. Like I said, let's look at those key indicators of risk. Let's try to mitigate the risk. And then we also have to have a way to remediate, because at the end of the day, you can't guarantee safety, right? I mean, you can't stop every single threat. You can't put risk at an absolute zero. So we need to make sure we have a way to remediate and get you back to a good operational state. So in summary, let's properly define risk and your thresholds. Remember that risk and a threat are not the same thing. Malware is a threat. Risk is related to a business impact, right? A financial impact. And what your thresholds are. So how far are you willing to take on risk in exchange for your company's good name, for losing data, for being out of business, for some defined period of time. Remember that everyone is a target, right? It's not just the big guys, it's not just the Targets and the Sonys. Everyone is. You individually at your house, at your business. There are no guarantees, as just mentioned, right? We can't stop everything, but we can reduce the likelihood of an event occurring. And data breaches, they aren't from a scene from a movie. It's not all 007 stuff. It's not someone in a hoodie on their computer trying to hack a system specifically. You can go out and you can buy ransomware on the internet for a couple bucks. I could buy it and email everyone in this room and see what I get out of it. Right? It's very simple. It's not that complex for the people that are doing it. And I would say most importantly, when we're talking about cybersecurity, the threat landscape has changed. We aren't where we were, right? So because of that, your security efforts should change as well. In closing, I would recommend working with Warwick, having a network assessment scheduled with them to help create a baseline, identify where those gaps are, and work together to see where you can move to from a current to a desired state. Thank you.